Black Hound of Death, Chapter 2, Dead Men with Torn Throats. Jim Tyke was dead, lying face down in a pool of his own blood, his red dabbled limbs sprawling drunkenly. I stared uneasily at the surrounding forest that hid the thing that had killed him. That it was a man, I knew. The outline in the brief light of the match had been vague but unmistakably human. But what sort of a weapon could make a wound like the merciless chomping of great bestial teeth? I shook my head, recalling the ingenuity of mankind in the creation of implements of slaughter, and considered a more acute problem. Should I risk my life further by continuing upon my course, or should I return to the outer world and bring in men and dogs to carry out poor Jim Tyke's corpse and hunt down his murderer? I did not waste much time in indecision. I'd set out to perform a task. If a murderous criminal besides Tope Braxton were abroad in the piney woods, there was all the more reason for warning the men in that lonely cabin. As for my own danger, I was already more than halfway to the cabin. It would scarcely be more dangerous to advance than retreat. If I did turn back and escape from Egypt alive, before I could rouse a posse, anything might happen in that isolated cabin under the black trees. So I left Jim Tyke's body there in the trail and went on, gun in hand and nerves sharpened by the new peril. That visitant had not been Tope Braxton. I had the dead man's word for it that the attacker was a mysterious white man. The glimpse I had had of the figure had confirmed the fact that he was not Tope Braxton. I would have known that squat, apish body even in the dark. This man was tall and spare, and the mere recollection of that gaunt figure made me shiver unreasoningly. It is no pleasant experience to walk along a black forest trail with only the stars glinting through the dense branches, and the knowledge that a ruthless murderer is lurking near, perhaps within arm's length in the concealing darkness. The recollection of the butchered black man burned vividly in my brain. Sweat beaded my face and hands, and I wheeled a score of times, glaring into the blackness where my ears had caught the rustle of leaves or the breaking of a twig. How could I know whether the sounds were but the natural noises of the forest or the stealthy movements of the killer? Once I stopped with an eerie crawling of my skin, as far away through the black trees I glimpsed a faint, lurid glow. It was not stationary. It moved, but it was too far away for me to make out the source. With my hair prickling unpleasantly, I waited, for I knew not what. But presently the mysterious glow vanished, and so keyed up I was to unnatural happenings that it was only then that I realized the light might well have been made by a man walking with a pine knot torch. I hurried on, cursing myself for my fears, the more baffling because they were so nebulous. Peril was no stranger to me in that land of feud and violence where century-old hates still smoldered down the generations. Threat of bullet or knife openly or from ambush had never shaken my nerves before, but I knew now that I was afraid of something I could not understand or explain. I sighed with relief when I saw Richard Brent's light gleaming through the pines, but I did not relax my vigilance. Many a man, danger-dogged, had been struck down at the very threshold of safety. Knocking on the door, I stood sidewise, peering into the shadows that ringed the tiny clearing and seemed to repel the faint light from the shuttered windows.
"Who's there?"
came a deep, harsh voice from within.
"Is that you, Ashley?"
"No, it's me, Kirby Garfield. Open the door." The upper half of the door swung inward, and Richard Brent's head and shoulders were framed in the opening. The light behind him left most of his face in shadow, but could not obscure the harsh, gaunt lines of his features, nor the gleam of the bleak gray eyes.
"What do you want at this time of night?"
he demanded with his usual brusqueness. I replied shortly, for I did not like the man. Courtesy in our part of the country is an obligation no gentleman thinks of shirking. "I came to tell you that it's very likely that a dangerous Negro is prowling in your vicinity. Tope Braxton killed Constable Joe Sorley and a Negro trustee, and broke out of jail this morning. I think he took refuge in Egypt. I thought you ought to be warned."
"Well, you warned me,"
he snapped in his short-clipped Eastern accent.
"Why don't you be off?"
"Because I have no intention of going back through those woods tonight," I answered angrily. "I came in here to warn you, not because of any love of you, but simply because you're a white man. The least you can do is let me put up in your cabin until morning. All I ask is a pallet on the floor. You don't even have to feed me." That last was an insult I could not withhold in my resentment. At least in the piney woods it is considered an insult. but Richard Brent ignored my thrust of his penuriousness and discourtesy. He scowled at me. I could not see his hands.
"Did you see Ashley anywhere along the trail?"
he asked finally. Ashley was his servant, a saturnine figure as taciturn as his master, who drove into the distant river village once a month for supplies. "No, but he might have been in town, and left after I did."
"I guess I'll have to let you in,"
he muttered grudgingly. "Well, hurry up," I requested. "I've got a gash in my shoulder I want to wash and dress. Tope Braxton isn't the only killer abroad tonight." At that, he halted in his fumbling at the lower door and his expression changed.
"What do you mean?"
"There's a dead nigger a mile or so up the trail. The man who killed him tried to kill me. He may be after you for all I know. The nigger he killed was guiding him here." Richard Brent started violently and his face went livid.
"What do you mean?"
His voice cracked, unexpectedly falsetto.
"What man?"
"I don't know. A fellow who manages to rip his victims like a hound."
"A hound?"
The words burst out in a scream. The change in Brent was hideous. His eyes seemed starting from his head. His hair stood up stiffly on his scalp, and his skin was the hue of ashes. His lips drew back from his teeth in a grin of sheer terror. He gagged and then found voice.
"Get out!"
he choked.
"I see it now. I know why you wanted to get in my house. You bloody devil. He sent you. You're a spy. Go."
The last was a scream, and his hands rose above the lower half of the door at last. I stared into the gaping muzzles of a sawed-off shotgun.
"Go before I kill you."
I stepped back off the stoop, my skin crawling at the thought of a close-range blast from that murderous implement of destruction. The black muzzles and the livid, convulsed face behind them promised sudden demolition. "You cursed fool," I growled, courting disaster in my anger. "Be careful with that thing. I'm going. I'd rather take a chance with a murderer than a madman." Brent made no reply. Panting and shivering like a man smitten with ague, he crouched over his shotgun and watched me as I turned and strode across the clearing. Where the trees began, I could have wheeled and shot him down without much danger, for my .45 would outrange his shorted and scattergun. But I'd come there to warn the fool, not to kill him. The upper door slammed as I strode in under the trees, and the scream of light was cut abruptly off. I drew my gun and plunged into the shadowy trail, my ears whetted again for sounds under the black branches. My thoughts reverted to Richard Brent. It was surely no friend who had sought guidance to his cabin. The man's frantic fear had bordered on insanity. I wondered if it had been to escape this man that Brent had exiled himself in this lonely stretch of pinelands and river. Surely it had been to escape something that he had come. For he never concealed his hatred of the country nor his contempt for the native people, white and black. But I had never believed that he was a criminal, hiding from the law. The light fell away behind me, vanished among the black trees. A curious, chill, sinking feeling obsessed me, as if the disappearance of that light, hostile as was its source, had severed the only link that connected this nightmarish adventure with the world of sanity and humanity. Grimly taking hold of my nerves, I strode on up the trail. But I had not gone far when again I halted. This time it was the unmistakable sound of horses running. The rumble of wheels mingled with the pounding of hoofs. Who would be coming along that nighted trail in a rig but Ashley? But instantly I realized that the team was headed in the other direction. The sound receded rapidly and soon became only a distant blur of noise. I quickened my pace, much puzzled, and presently I heard hurried, stumbling footsteps ahead of me, and a quick, breathless panting that seemed indicative of panic. I distinguished the footsteps of two people, though I could see nothing in the intense darkness. At that point, the branches interlaced over the trail, forming a black arch through which not even the stars gleamed. "Oh there," I called cautiously. "Who are you?" Instantly the sounds ceased abruptly, and I could picture two shadowy figures standing tensely still, with bated breath. "Who's there?" I repeated. "Don't be afraid. It's me, Kirby Garfield."
"Stand where you are,"
came a hard voice I recognized as Ashley's.
"You sound like Garfield, but I want to be sure. If you move, you'll get a slug through you."
There was a scratching sound and a tiny flame leaped up. A human hand was etched in its glow, and behind it the square, hard face of Ashley peering in my direction, A pistol in his other hand caught the glint of the fire, and on that arm rested another hand, a slim, white hand, with a jewel sparkling on one finger. Dimly I made out the slender figure of a woman. Her face was like a pale blossom in the gloom.
"Yes, it's you, all right,"
Ashley grunted.
"What are you doing here?"
"I came to warn Brent about Tote Braxton," I answered shortly. I do not relish being called on to account for my actions to anybody. "You've heard about it, naturally. If I'd known you were in town, it would have saved me a trip. What are you all doing on foot?"
"Our horses ran away a short distance back," he answered. "There was a dead Negro in the trail, but that's not what frightened the horses. When we got out to investigate, they snorted and wheeled and bolted with the rig. We had to come on foot. It's been a pretty nasty experience. From the looks of the Negro, I judge a pack of wolves killed him, and the scent frightened the horses. We've been expecting an attack any minute."
"Wolves don't hunt in packs and drag down human beings in these woods. It was a man that killed Jim Tyke." In the waning glow of the match, Ashley stood staring at me in amazement, and then I saw the astonishment ebb from his countenance and horror grow there. Slowly his color ebbed, leaving his bronzed face as ashy as that of his master had been. The match went out and we stood silent. "Well," I said impatiently, "speak up, man. Who's the lady with you?"
"She's Mr. Brent's niece."
The answer came tonelessly through dry lips.
"I'm Gloria Brent,"
she exclaimed in a voice whose cultured accent was not lost in the fear that caused it to tremble.
"Uncle Richard wired for me to come to him at once."
"I've seen the wire," Ashley muttered. "You showed it to me, but I don't know how he sent it. He hasn't been to the village, to my knowledge, in months."
"I came on from New York as fast as I could," she exclaimed. "I can't understand why the telegram was sent to me instead of to somebody else in the family."
"You were always your uncle's favorite, miss," said Ashley.
"Well, when I got off the boat at the village just before nightfall, I found Ashley just getting ready to drive home. He was surprised to see me, but of course he brought me on out, and then that dead man."
She seemed considerably shaken by the experience. It was obvious that she had been raised in a very refined and sheltered atmosphere. If she had been born in the piney woods, as I was, the sight of a dead man, white or black, would not have been an uncommon phenomenon to her.
The dead man,"
she stammered, and then she was answered most hideously. From the black woods beside the trail rose a shriek of blood-curdling laughter. Slavering, mouthing sounds followed it, so strange and garbled that at first I did not recognize them as human words. Their inhuman intonations sent a chill down my spine.
"Dead men,"
the inhuman voice chanted.
"Dead men with torn throats. There will be dead men among the pines before dawn. Dead men. Fools, you are all dead."
Ashley and I both fired in the direction of the voice, and in the crashing reverberations of our shots, the ghastly chant was drowned. But the weird laugh rang out again, deeper in the woods, and then silence closed down like a black fog in which I heard the semi-hysterical gasping of the girl. She had released Ashley and was clinging frantically to me. I could feel the quivering of her lithe body against mine. Probably she had merely followed her feminine instinct to seek refuge with the strongest. The light of the match had shown her that I was a bigger man than Ashley.
"Hurry, for God's sake!"
Ashley's voice sounded strangled.
"Can't be far to the cabin. Hurry! You'll come with us, Mr. Garfield."
"What was it?"
the girl was panting.
"Oh, what was it?"
"A madman, I think," I answered, tucking her trembling little hand under my left arm. But at the back of my mind was whispering the grisly realization that no madman ever had a voice like that. It sounded like some bestial creature speaking with human words, but not with a human tongue. "Get on the other side of Miss Brent, Ashley," I directed. "Keep as far from the trees as you can. If anything moves on that side, shoot first and ask questions later. I'll do the same on this side. Now, come on." He made no reply as he complied. His fright seemed deeper than that of the girl. His breath came in shuddering gasps. The trail seemed endless, the darkness abysmal. Fear stalked along the trail on either hand and slunk grinning at our backs. My flesh crawled to the thought of a demoniacal, clawed and fanged thing hurling itself upon my shoulders. The girl's little feet scarcely touched the ground as we almost carried her between us. Ashley was almost as tall as I, though not so heavy, and was strongly made. Ahead of us, a light glimmered between the trees at last, and a gusty sigh of relief burst from his lips. He increased his pace until we were almost running.
"The cabin at last, thank God,"
he gasped as we plunged out of the trees. "Hail your employer, Ashley," I grunted. "He's driven me off with a gun once tonight. I don't want to be shot at by the old—" I stopped, remembering the girl.
"Mr. Brent,"
shouted Ashley.
"Mr. Brent, open the door quick. It's me, Ashley."
Instantly, light flooded from the door as the upper half was drawn back and Brent peered out, shotgun in hand, blinking into the darkness.
"Hurry and get in."
Panic still thrummed in his voice. Then,
"Who's that standing behind you?"
he shouted furiously.
"Mr. Garfield and your niece, Miss Gloria."
"Uncle Richard,"
she cried, her voice catching in a sob. Pulling loose from us, she ran forward and threw her lithe body half over the lower door, throwing her arms around his neck.
"Uncle Richard, I'm so afraid. What does this all mean?"
He seemed thunderstruck.
"Gloria,"
he repeated.
"What in heaven's name are you doing here?"
"Why, you sent for me."
She fumbled out a crumpled yellow telegraph form.
"See? You said for me to come at once."
He went livid again.
"I never said that, Gloria. Good God, why should I drag you into my particular hell? There's something devilish here. Come in. Come in quickly."
He jerked open the door and pulled her inside, never relinquishing the shotgun. He seemed to fumble in a daze. Ashley shouldered in after her and exclaimed to me,
"Come in, Mr. Garfield. Come in, come in."
I had made no move to follow them. At the mention of my name, Brent, who seemed to have forgotten my presence, jerked loose from the girl with a choking cry and wheeled, throwing up the shotgun. But this time I was ready for him. My nerves were too much on edge to let me submit to any more bullying. Before he could bring the gun into position, he was looking in the muzzle of my .45. "Put it down, Brent," I snapped. "Drop it before I break your arm. I'm fed up on your idiotic suspicions." He hesitated, glaring wildly, and behind them the girl shrank away. I suppose that in the full flood of the light from the doorway I was not a figure to inspire confidence in a young girl, with my frame which is built for strength and not looks, and my dark face scarred by many a brutal river battle.
"He's our friend, Mr. Brent,"
interposed Ashley.
"He helped us in the woods." "He's a devil,"
raved Brent, clinging to his gun, though not trying to lift it.
"He came here to murder us. He lied when he said he came to warn us against a black man. What man would be fool enough to come into Egypt at night just to warn a stranger? My God, has he got both of you fooled? I tell you, he wears the brand of the Hound." "Then you know he's here,"
cried Ashley.
"Yes, this fiend told me, trying to worm his way into the house. God, Ashley, he's tracked us down. In spite of all our cleverness, we've trapped ourselves. In a city, we might buy protection, but here in this accursed forest, who will hear our cries or come to our aid when the fiend closes in upon us? What fools. What fools we were to think to hide from him in this wilderness." "I heard him laugh," shuddered Ashley. "He taunted us from the bushes in his beast's voice. I saw the man he killed, ripped and mangled as if by the fangs of Satan himself. What are we to do? What can we do except lock ourselves in and fight to the last?"
shrieked Brent. His nerves were in frightful shape.
"Please, tell me what it is all about,"
pleaded the trembling girl. With a terrible, despairing laugh, Brent threw out his arm, gesturing toward the black woods beyond the faint light.
"The devil in human form is lurking out there," he exclaimed. "He has tracked me across the world and has cornered me at last. Do you remember Adam Grimm?"
"The man who went with you to Mongolia 5 years ago? But he died, you said. You came back without him."
"I thought he was dead," muttered Brent. "Listen, I will tell you. Among the black mountains of Inner Mongolia, where no white man has ever penetrated, our expedition was attacked by fanatical devil worshippers, the black monks of Erlik, who dwell in the forgotten and accursed city of Yalgan. Our guides and servants were killed, and all our stock driven off but one small camel. Grimm and I stood them off all day, firing from behind the rocks when they tried to rush us. That night we planned to make a break for it, on the camel that remained to us. But it was evident to me that the beast could not carry us both to safety.
one man might have a chance. When darkness fell, I struck Grim from behind with my gun butt, knocking him senseless. Then I mounted the camel and fled. He did not heed the look of sick amazement and abhorrence growing in the girl's lovely face. Her wide eyes were fixed on her uncle as if she were seeing the real man for the first time, and was stricken by what she saw. He plunged on, too obsessed and engulfed by fear to care or heed what she thought of him. The sight of a soul stripped of its conventional veneer and surface pretense is not always pleasant. I broke through the lines of the besiegers and escaped in the night. Grim naturally fell into the hands of the devil worshippers, and for years I supposed that he was dead. They had the reputation of slaying by torture every alien that they captured. Years passed and I had almost forgotten the episode. Then, 7 months ago, I learned that he was alive, was indeed back in America, thirsting for my life. The monks had not killed him. Through their damnable arts, they had altered him. The man is no longer wholly human, but his whole soul is bent on my destruction. To appeal to the police would have been useless. He would have tricked them and wreaked his vengeance in spite of them. I fled from him up and down across the country for more than a month, like a hunted animal. And finally, when I thought I had thrown him off the track, I took refuge in this God-forsaken wilderness, among these barbarians, of whom that man Kirby Garfield is a typical example.
You can talk of barbarians?
She flamed, and her scorn would have cut the soul of any man who was not so totally engrossed in his own fears. She turned to me.
Mr. Garfield, please come in. You must not try to traverse this forest at night with that fiend at large.
No, shrieked Brent. Get back from the door, you little fool. Ashley, hold your tongue. I tell you, he is one of Adam Grimm's creatures. He shall not set foot in this cabin.
She looked at me, pale, helpless, and forlorn, and I pitied her as I despised Richard Brent. She looked so small and bewildered. I wouldn't sleep in your cabin if all the wolves of hell were howling outside, I snarled at Brent. I'm going, and if you shoot me in the back, I'll kill you before I die. I wouldn't have come back at all, but the young lady needed my protection. She needs it now, but it's your privilege to deny her that. Miss Brent, I said, if you wish, I'll come back tomorrow with a buckboard and carry you to the village. You'd better go back to New York.
Ashley will take her to the village, roared Brent. Damn you. Will you go?
With a sneer that brought the blood purpling his countenance, I turned squarely upon him and strode off. The door banged behind me, and I heard his falsetto voice mingled with the tearful accents of his niece. Poor girl. It must have been like a nightmare to her, to have been snatched out of her sheltered urban life and dropped down in a country strange and primitive to her, among people whose ways seemed incredibly savage and violent, and into a bloody episode of wrong and menace and vengeance. The deep pinelands of the Southwest seemed strange and alien enough at any time to the average eastern city dweller, and added to their gloomy mystery and primordial wilderness was this grim phantom out of an unsuspected past, like the figment of a nightmare. I turned squarely about, stood motionless in the black trail, staring back at the pinpoint of light, which still winked through the trees. Peril hovered over the cabin in that tiny clearing, and it was no part of a white man to leave that girl with the protection of none but her half-lunatic uncle and his servant. Ashley looked like a fighter, but Brent was an unpredictable quantity. I believed he was tinged with madness. His insane rages and equally insane suspicions seemed to indicate as much. I had no sympathy for him. A man who would sacrifice his friend to save his own life deserves death. But evidently Grimm was mad. His slaughter of Jim Tyke suggested homicidal insanity. Poor Jim Tyke had never wronged him. I would have killed Grimm for that murder alone, if I had had the opportunity. And I did not intend that the girl should suffer for the sins of her uncle. If Brent had not sent that telegram as he swore, then it looked much as if she had been summoned for a sinister purpose. Who but Grimm himself would have summoned her to share the doom he planned for Richard Brent? Turning, I strode back down the trail, if I could not enter the cabin. I could at least lurk in the shadows, ready at hand if my help was needed. A few moments later, I was under the fringe of trees that ringed the clearing. Light still shone through the cracks in the shutters, and at one place a portion of the window pane was visible. And even as I looked, this pane was shattered, as if something had been hurled through it. Instantly, the night was split by a sheet of flame that burst in a blinding flash out of the doors and windows and chimney of the cabin. For one infinitesimal instant, I saw the cabin limned blackly against the tongues of flame that flashed from it. With the flash came the thought that the cabin had been blown up, but no sound accompanied the explosion. Even while the blaze was still in my eyes, another explosion filled the universe with blinding sparks, and this one was accompanied by a thunderous reverberation. Consciousness was blotted out too suddenly for me to know that I had been struck on the head from behind, terrifically and without warning. End of section 2.